Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here. Thank you for your service. There is no job more important in the administration than protecting our homeland. So I appreciate your service in this very important role. I would note as we discuss immigration, I myself am the son of an immigrant from Cuba, and I'm a passionate advocate for legal immigration. Indeed, there's no stronger advocate for legal immigration in the U.S. Senate than I am. But at the same time, I think much of the discussion of immigration ignores, disregards the humanitarian crisis that is caused by illegal immigration. As you know, I represent the state of Texas, and in the state of Texas, immigration is not something abstract and theoretical that we read about in the newspapers. Immigration is something that as Texans we deal with every day, and illegal immigration is something that as Texans we deal with every day. The humanitarian crisis that comes from our failure to secure the borders is staggering. In 2013, the Border Patrol reported the emergencies and crimes it encountered. And most of the cases where those who came here illegally were the victims. So there were 2,346 rescues, 461 assaults, and 445 deaths. Indeed, last year I received a letter from one of my constituents in Brooks County, a veterinarian who has worked with ranchers, Texas ranchers, Mexican ranchers his entire life. Yes, sir. Yep. And this veterinarian wrote, quote, "I live on a Brooks County ranch with my wife. In 2012, 129 bodies of deceased illegal aliens were found in our county on private ranch land. Most of those bodies were found within 15 minutes of our front door in any given direction. We believe those bodies represent only 20 to 25% of the actual number of illegal immigrants dying in this area. In 1 week of last July, I personally rescued 15 people, most were Central Americans, that were lost and close to dying from dehydration and heat exhaustion. That same week, I found a deceased person that had been laid across a dirt road in order to be found. He was a 31-year-old man from El Salvador. This is a humanitarian crisis that we have a legal system in place that is failing to secure the border and that is incentivizing people crossing illegally. And secondly, we have in particular a humanitarian crisis with respect to unaccompanied minors. That is a crisis that is the direct consequence of policies of the Obama administration. In 2011, there were roughly 7,000 unaccompanied minors who were apprehended. In 2012, that number rose to 14,000. In 2013, it rose to 24,000. And in 2014, your agency is estimating it's going to be as high as 90,000. In 2015, the administration is estimating that it will rise all the way to 145,000. Now, it's important to understand what these numbers represent. These numbers represent children, little boys and little girls that their parents are handing over not to some noble social worker trying to help them. They're handing over to international global criminal cartels that smuggle human beings in. They put these kids, among other places, on top of fast-moving freight trains. These are criminals who sexually assault, who physically assault, and who sometimes murder these children. These are little girls that are sometimes being sold into prostitution and sex slavery. Now, Mr. Secretary, you testified to this committee that the increase is a result of violence in Central America, and there is surely violence in Central America. But if you look at the statistics, in particular, you can see where they were. These are unaccompanied minors in 2011 and 2012. Midway through 2012 was when the administration unilaterally granted amnesty to some 800,000 people who had been minors, the so-called DACA proceeding. And you can see shortly after that, the numbers spike dramatically. Is it really your testimony that granting amnesty to some 800,000 people who came illegally as children had no effect in causing a dramatic increase in children being handed over to international cartels to be smuggled in here illegally?
Well, first, DACA is not amnesty. It is deferred action. Second, DACA applies only to people who came into this country as children prior to June 2007. That was 7 years ago. DACA does not apply to anybody who comes into this country today, tomorrow, or yesterday. The earned path to citizenship contemplated in the Senate bill does not apply to anybody who comes into this country today, tomorrow, or yesterday. It applies to people who came into this country by year-end 2011. I believe, Senator, that the primary motivator for the reason for this spike in migration, and I'm not a sociologist, I'm not an expert, is the situations that Senator Durbin and others have laid out in these countries.
Mr. Secretary, and my time is expiring, but with all respect, in my view, that argument is a red herring. That argument explains why we've seen an increase in Central American immigration, to be sure, because of the problems and challenges those nations are facing. But it doesn't explain the unaccompanied minors. In 2011, 15% of the OTMs, of the other than Mexicans apprehended, were unaccompanied minors. In 2014, that number's grown to 37%. There's nothing about the violence in Central America that would cause people to be handing over their children, little girls and little boys, separately. It will cause more people from Central America to come here, but not the kids. And I will say this in closing, because my time is expiring. It has been widely reported that President Obama, that the administration is contemplating yet another amnesty, like DACA, like 2 years ago, just a couple of months before the upcoming election. And I will say to you, and I will urge you to pass on to the President, that I think that would be a grave mistake. I think it would be contrary to rule of law. And I think granting yet another amnesty would result in those numbers going even higher, would result in even more little girls and little boys being subjected to violence and horrific, dangerous conditions. And it would be a serious mistake for us to go down that road. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cruz.